Welcome to the deep dive. So today we're jumping into a really fascinating case study in how political systems can just completely change,
And we're talking about New Zealand.
like in New Zealand, which for decades was sort of held up as this perfect example of the Westminster parliamentary model.
The gold standard, yeah. Political scientists absolutely loved it. I mean, people like Aaron Lidgefart, back in the 80s, they pointed to New Zealand and said, see, this is how it's supposed to work.
Global stability.
Incredible stability. You had this fierce two-party rivalry, national versus labor, and the defining thing was always single-party majority governments, one after the other.
And that produced some real political heavyweights. I mean, Keith Holyoake was in for 12 years, Jim Bolger for 7. That's a long time.
It is. But that whole system, that textbook stability, it got completely turned on its head by this huge institutional shift between about 1993 and 1996.
Right. And that's our mission for this deep dive. First, we need to understand what on earth happened to force such a stable system to change.
And second, and this is where it gets really interesting, we need to analyze how incredibly adaptable the politicians were. I mean, they were faced with this new reality of multi-party rule, and they had to invent new ways to govern.
And they moved away from those classic, rigid cabinet coalitions.
And towards these really innovative, flexible things called network agreements or support contracts.
And what's so fascinating is how this whole story, this transition, it forced these major parties who were just used to absolute power
Yeah, total dominance.
to suddenly learn how to negotiate, how to compromise. They had to create these like multi-layered alliances that were totally alien to them before.
A whole new ball game.
And for you, the listener, really getting to grips with this story, it offers, I think, a really powerful critique of some political ideas we just take for granted.
Specifically the term minority government.
Exactly. We're going to challenge that whole concept because what New Zealand shows is that if a government actually survives, it has a majority supporting it. It's just that that support might be hidden in a complex web of deals.
Let's get into it.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. The pre-1993 Westminster system in New Zealand. What was it about its DNA that made it so stable?
Well, a lot of it was just baked into the rules of the game. You had very strong single-chamber parliament, the House of Representatives, and crucially, it used the first-past-the-post electoral system, FPTP.
And that system just naturally squeezes out smaller parties.
It does. It rewards parties with geographically concentrated support, so it just naturally created this environment where one of the two big guys, National or Labor, would almost always win an outright majority of seats.
And what about the constitutional setup? I mean, unlike the U.S., there's no single big document, right? It's all sort of scattered.
That's right. It's not codified. The key sources of authority are things like the Treaty of Waitangi from 1840, which is about indigenous rights, and the Constitution Act from 1986.
So how did that lack of a single constitution affect where the power really was?
It basically just reinforced the power of the cabinet. I mean, in theory, the monarch represented by the Governor General is sovereign in law.
But that's not the reality.
No, not at all. The actual functional executive power is all concentrated in the hands of the cabinet and the ministers. The convention is that the Governor General does whatever the Prime Minister tells them to do.
So as long as the cabinet has the numbers in Parliament, their power is pretty much unchecked.
Virtually unchecked, yes.
And there's this other unique feature that you mentioned about how governments are actually formed. It's different from a lot of places in Europe.
Oh, it's a huge difference. And it's key to understanding that old culture of single-party rule.
Okay, so break it down for us.
Well, in many parliamentary systems, especially those with proportional representation, a new government has to face a formal vote of confidence right away before it can even start governing.
To prove has the support of the Parliament.
Exactly. But in New Zealand, that step just didn't exist. The new government was simply sworn in by the Governor General, and that was that.
So there was no immediate test of their support.
None. The first real check on their power didn't come until much later, with the vote on something called the Address in Reply to the Speech from the Throne.
So what did that mean in practice?
It meant that forming a government was an internal party matter. It wasn't about negotiating with other parties. It was just about who won the election. It reinforced this idea that single-party rule was the normal default setting. The idea of a coalition was, well, it was almost unthinkable.
Given that deep, deep history of stability, what were the tectonic shifts that finally broke that model? Because that duopoly seemed unshakable.
Well, the foundation started to crumble after the 1970s. Those old traditional divisions that defined the parties, National was the party of farmers and business owners. Labor was for urban workers.
Those lines started to blur.
They really did. As the country modernized, new political battlegrounds just started to emerge.
We're talking about those post-materialist issues, right?
Exactly. Things like indigenous rights for the Maori population, a growing demand for gender equality, and critically, environmental policy. These were new issues that didn't fit neatly into that old owner versus worker box.
And that created an opening for new political voices.
It did. But it was an opening that the rigid first-past-the-post system was designed to slam shut.
And that brings us to the moment that really proved the system was broken. That one election that became the smoking gun.
The 1981 election, yes. That result became the central exhibit for everyone arguing for electoral reform.
So what happened? There was this third party, social credit.
Right, and they were really tapping into these new issues. And in 1981, they got a remarkable 20.65% of the national vote.
Wow. So 1 in 5 voters cast their ballot for social credit?
1 in 5, a huge chunk of the electorate. But then you look at how many seats they actually won in Parliament.
It was nothing, basically.
It was 2, just 2 seats out of 99. That's about 2% of the seats for 20% of the vote.
That is just, it's fundamentally unfair.
It's a complete failure of representation. And you can't hide numbers like that. When a fifth of your voters are essentially told their vote doesn't matter, it corrodes public trust in the whole system.
And that failure of the system was happening at the same time the major parties themselves were starting to fracture.
That's the other crucial piece of the puzzle. You have these high-profile, really powerful politicians who are defecting. Jim Anderton left the Labour Party and eventually formed a new bloc called the Alliance.
And then there was Winston Peters.
Winston Peters, a real firebrand populist. He left the National Party to form his own party, New Zealand First.
No, these weren't just fringe movements. These were new, relevant parties led by established political figures.
Exactly. They had name recognition, they had support, and suddenly you had a genuine multi-party environment. But it was stuck inside an electoral system designed for only 2. It was a pressure cooker.
So by 1993, the system was at a breaking point. The famous stability was about to be sacrificed for the sake of better representation.
Something had to give.
And what makes this whole political revolution so amazing is that it wasn't driven by the politicians.
Not at all. Both National and Labour knew that changing the electoral system meant giving up their guaranteed path to power. They fought it. This was a reform that was pushed from the ground up by the public through referendums.
So the first one was in 1992, and it was basically just asking people, are you fed up?
Pretty much. And the answer was a resounding yes. Part A of the referendum asked if they wanted to change the system at all, and 84.7% of people said yes.
An overwhelming mandate.
A huge mandate for change. And then Part B asked which new system they'd prefer, and mixed member proportional, or MMP, was the clear favorite, with over 70% support.
So that set the stage for the final decisive vote in 1993.
Yes, the 1993 referendum was the final showdown. It was a direct choice. Stick with the old first-past-the-post system or switch to MMP.
And MMP won.
It did. It got 53.9% of the vote. It wasn't a total landslide, but it was a clear democratic decision to make the single biggest institutional change in the country's modern history.
So let's break down the mechanics of MMP. Because this is the engine that creates the whole political landscape we're talking about. It's all about having 2 votes.
That's right. Every voter gets to cast 2 votes on their ballot. The first one is the electorate vote.
And that's for a local candidate in your area?
Exactly. It works just like the old system. You vote for a person, and whoever gets the most votes in your district wins that seat. It keeps that sense of local connection.
But the second vote, the party vote, that's the one that really changes things.
That is the key to proportionality. With your party vote, you're voting for a national political party. And that vote is what determines the total number of seats each party gets in Parliament overall.
So it guarantees that a party's share of the seats matches its share of the national vote.
Pretty much perfectly, yeah. They use a formula called the Santalag rule to calculate it. It ensures that small parties that get, say, 5% of the vote get 5% of the seats.
And filling the seats is a 2-step process, right? The local winners get their seats first.
Correct. The candidates who win the local electorate races get their seats guaranteed. Then, the remaining seats that a party is owed, based on its party vote, are filled from their national party list.
Which can lead to this really weird and interesting thing called an overhang.
The overhang, yes. It's a fascinating quirk. It happens if a party wins more local electorate seats than its national party vote says it should get overall.
So what happens then? Do they have to give a seat back?
No, and this is the key. They get to keep all the local seats they won. And to maintain proportionality, the parliament just gets temporarily bigger.
So they just add extra seats.
They add overhang seats. It happened in 2008 when parliament grew by 2 seats, and again in 2011. It's a neat little mechanism to make sure both local representation and national proportionality are respected.
So the switch happens. What were the immediate consequences after 1996?
The impact was huge, and it was immediate. First, just the sheer level of proportionality, that disproportionality index we talked about, the one that was averaging over 11%, it dropped to just 3%. Overnight, New Zealand became one of the most representative democracies on the planet.
But that gain in fairness came at a cost. And the cost was that guaranteed stability.
It was the end of stability as they knew it. The hung parliament became the new normal.
Meaning no single party could win a majority on its own.
Exactly. Between the 1996 election and the 2017 election, not one single party managed to win an outright majority. So every single government in that 20-year span had to be formed through some kind of deal between parties. Single-party rule was dead.
And that, of course, meant a huge surge in power for the smaller parties.
Oh, it was a massive shift. The number of parties in parliament just exploded. It went from 3 in 1990 to 8 by 2005.
And these small parties, ACT, the Greens, New Zealand First, they suddenly became kingmakers.
They held the balance of power. They were the ones who got to decide whether it was a national-led government or a labor-led government. Their influence was immense.
And yet, what's so interesting is that even with all this fragmentation, the two big parties didn't just fade away. The duopoly kind of persisted.
That's the great paradox of New Zealand politics. Even in this new multi-party world, National and Labour remained the two suns that the whole system orbited around. By 2017, they still controlled over 80% of the vote and 85% of the seats between them.
So the game just changed. It wasn't about one of them winning outright anymore.
No. It became a competition between two large blocs to see which one could successfully assemble a coalition of smaller partners to get them over the majority line. And, crucially, every prime minister since 1996 has still come from either National or Labour.
Okay, so this new political reality, it required a whole new vocabulary, a new way of thinking about how governments are built.
It did. And the first thing we have to do is make a really clear distinction between two different types of coalitions.
The first one is the easy one, right? The cabinet coalition.
That's the traditional model. The partners all agree to join the government, they take on ministerial jobs in the cabinet, and they share collective responsibility for everything. Simple.
But the second type is where all the innovation happened. The parliamentary coalition.
Exactly. This is much more complex. Here, the junior partners agree to support the government, but they formally stay outside the cabinet.
So they don't take any ministerial jobs.
Right. Their job is purely legislative. They promise to provide the crucial votes in Parliament to keep the government alive on confidence motions on the budget.
And this is what really blurs that old, clear line between government and opposition.
It totally blurs it. You can have a party that's not in the government, but is absolutely essential to its survival.
Okay, and this blurring leads us to a really key theoretical point from our sources, which is this kind of logical attack on the very idea of a minority government.
Right, and I know it sounds counterintuitive because we all use that term.
We do. And if you look at a government and see only one party holding all the cabinet posts, it certainly feels like a minority government. Doesn't that political perception matter?
It absolutely matters for accountability, and that's a huge issue. But the sources are making a point about functional reality. Think about it. If a government actually manages to survive for a full term, it is mathematically impossible for it to be a true minority government.
Because if it were, it would have lost its first big vote.
It would have lost the budget vote or a confidence vote, and it would have been gone. So the fact that it's surviving proves it must have the support of a majority of the parliament.
The support is just coming from outside the cabinet.
Precisely. So the term majority or minority shouldn't really apply to the government itself, but to the entire network or alliance that's keeping it in power. The support is there, it's just structured differently.
And that structure is built on these innovative deals that New Zealand really perfected, the support contracts.
The whole spectrum of them, yeah.
So let's break down the different levels of commitment, starting with the most involved one, the top tier.
So the maximum variant is what's called an enhanced confidence and supply agreement. This is way more than just a promise to vote for the budget.
What else does it involve?
The junior partner actually gets executive roles. Not full cabinet minister positions, but they might get to be, say, an undersecretary or a non-cabinet minister with responsibility for a specific area.
So they get a seat at the table, but without the full weight of cabinet responsibility.
Exactly. And the key to making this work is a very important escape clause.
The agree to disagree clause.
Yes. The junior partner promises to support the government on most things, but they explicitly reserve the right to vote against the government on certain specific issues that clash with their own party's core beliefs. It lets them keep their identity.
Okay, so that's the top tier. What's the next step down?
That would be the standard confidence and supply agreement, or sometimes just called a cooperation agreement. This is a much simpler, purely legislative deal.
No ministerial jobs at all.
None. The party just commits to one thing: voting with the government on confidence motions and the annual budget, basically to prevent a snap election.
So what's in it for them?
Policy wins. They trade their votes for influence over specific pieces of legislation or for a guarantee that the government will pass one of their pet projects. It's very transactional.
And then there's the bottom level of support, which sounds like just barely tolerating the government.
That's a good way to put it. It's the memorandum of understanding. This is the absolute minimum level of commitment. The junior partner isn't promising to vote for the government at all.
So what are they promising?
They're just promising not to vote against it on those key votes. They might abstain or even just make sure some of their MPs are absent from the chamber, which lowers the number of votes the government needs to win. It's just tolerance.
So why would a big party like National or Labor choose this complex web of deals over a simple old-fashioned coalition?
There are a few really smart strategic reasons. The first is about control. With these contracts, the senior partner keeps complete control over the cabinet. They don't have to give away the most powerful jobs.
And it must make it easier to manage ideological differences.
So much easier. I mean, if you're a left-wing Labor government and you need support from a free market party, the last thing you want is them inside your cabinet arguing every single day. A support contract keeps them at a safe distance.
But the most sophisticated reason, the one that really shows their strategic thinking, is about creating a safety net.
Yes, the creation of a surplus alliance. This is where you don't just get enough support for a majority, you get more than enough.
Redundancy.
Exactly. You sign up multiple small parties. That way, you're protected from blackmail. If one small party threatens to walk away over a policy dispute, it doesn't matter. You still have enough votes from your other partners to survive. It's brilliant, really.
But these deals aren't without their critics. I mean, the biggest problem seems to be a lack of transparency and accountability.
That's the huge downside. There's a real potential for it to look like, well, political corruption. You see it in other countries, like that deal in the UK where the DUP got £1 billion for their support. It can look like votes for cash.
And voters must get confused when they see parties with totally opposite beliefs propping up the same government.
Ideological incoherence, yeah. But the biggest democratic problem is the low accountability for that junior partner. They get real influence. They get policy wins, but because they're not in cabinet,
They can distance themselves from any failures.
they can use that agree to disagree clause to wash their hands of any unpopular decision. They get the power without the responsibility, and that makes it really hard for voters to know who to blame.
Okay, so we've got the theory down. Let's see how this all played out in practice, starting with that really chaotic transition period from 93 to 96.
This period is so important because it shows the system was already falling apart. Even before MMP officially started, the 93 election was still under the old rules, and it left the National Party with a majority of 1 seat.
On a knife edge.
A total knife edge. 50 seats to the opposition's 49. And in such a volatile political atmosphere, that was a recipe for chaos.
And the chaos came from defections, right? Individual MPs realizing their single vote was suddenly incredibly powerful.
Absolutely. Within a year, the government had lost its majority. An MP named Ross Marant defected and formed his own little faction, and the Prime Minister, Jim Bolger, had to immediately scramble to get his support back.
And this forced him to use one of these newfangled support contracts for the first time.
Yes, even before MMP, Bolger signed a formal enhanced confidence and supply agreement with Marant. It was a straight-up deal. Marant would vote for the government on confidence and supply, and in return, he got to keep his non-cabinet ministerial job.
The blueprint was set.
The blueprint was set out of sheer desperation.
But the defections just kept coming. It sounds like the government was constantly patching up leaks.
It was. The situation got so unstable that Bolger eventually decided to try and force some stability by going back to the old playbook. He formed a full classic cabinet coalition with a new splinter party.
And did that work?
It made things worse. That new, supposedly stable majority started eroding almost immediately because of even more defections from his own party.
Wow. So the lesson was that the old, rigid model just couldn't handle this new, fluid reality.
It was a total failure. The government basically just limped into the first MMP election in 1996, looking incredibly weak.
And that 96 election delivered the first real multi-party result. National got 44 seats, Labor 37. But the kingmaker was Winston Peters in his 17 seats.
Peters held all the cards. He dragged out negotiations for 2 whole months, keeping the entire country in suspense. And then he made a decision that shocked everyone.
He decided to form a classic cabinet coalition with the National Party, his old enemies.
The party he left, it was a stunning move. And I think National made a huge miscalculation. They thought by bringing him into the cabinet, they could control him.
But he drove a hard bargain.
A very hard bargain. He became deputy prime minister, and they created a whole new powerful post for him as treasurer. His party, NZ First, got 9 ministerial jobs in total. It was a full-on power-sharing deal.
And it went badly, fast.
It was a disaster from day one. The policy arguments, the personality clashes, it was just toxic. So toxic, in fact, that the National Party staged an internal coup. They decided Bolger was too weak to handle Peters, so they kicked him out and replaced him with Jenny Shipley.
So Shipley inherits this imploding coalition.
And her relationship with Peters was even worse. They were constantly at war, publicly and privately, until August 1998, when she just fired him, sacked her own deputy prime minister.
The coalition collapses.
It implodes. But here's the most fascinating part of the story. The government doesn't fall.
How on earth did it survive?
It survived for another 16 months purely on the back of these flexible ad hoc parliamentary deals. Shipley got support from the ACT party, from another small party, and crucially, from a group of MPs who defected from Winston Peters' own party.
So she proved that the informal, networked model of support was actually more resilient than the formal, rigid coalition that had just blown up.
That's the key lesson from that whole saga. And it was a lesson that the next prime minister, Labour's Helen Clark, learned very, very well.
Right, so Clark comes to power in 1999, and this is when we see the beginning of what the sources call the era of network cooperation.
Clark took the lessons of that 96-99 chaos to heart. She formed a standard cabinet coalition with the left-wing Alliance Party. But even together, they didn't have a majority. They needed the 7 seats held by the Green Party.
And they secured their support with a confidence and supply agreement. But why weren't the Greens just invited into the cabinet?
Politics. Pure and simple. The leader of the alliance, Jim Anderton, had a long and bitter history with the Greens. He basically gave Clark an ultimatum. It's them or us.
So to keep her main coalition partner happy, she had to keep the Greens at arm's length.
Exactly. The Greens got policy influence, especially on environmental issues, but they got 0 executive power. It was a masterful bit of political management.
But Clark's real genius came after the next elections, in 2002 and 2005, when she deliberately built that surplus parliamentary coalition we talked about.
This is where it becomes like political architecture. Her core government was still a small cabinet coalition, but then she layered on the support. She had a CNS deal with the centrist United Future Party. She had a separate cooperation agreement with the left-wing Greens. And by 2005, she'd even added a deal with Winston Peters' New Zealand First.
That is an incredible mix of different ideologies to hold together. How did she make it work?
She was incredibly smart about it. She basically segmented the policy agenda. When she needed to pass her budget or other neoliberal economic policies, she knew she could count on the votes from the centrist United Future.
Even though the Greens would hate those policies.
Right. The Greens would vote against them, but their agreement meant they wouldn't bring down the government over it. And then, when she wanted to pass social reforms or environmental laws, she'd rely on the Green Party's votes.
Knowing that United Future might oppose them?
Exactly. She could always find a majority for any given policy by drawing on different parts of her network. It was a sophisticated juggling act, and it gave her 9 years of stable government. It proved its network model was superior.
So when the Conservatives, led by John Key, came back to power in 2008, did they try to go back to the old ways?
Not at all. They adopted and then perfected the network strategy that Clark had pioneered.
How so?
Well, in 2008, National was just 2 seats shy of a majority. So Key immediately went out and signed enhanced confidence and supply agreements with 3 different junior partners: the right-wing ACT Party, the centrist United Future, and the indigenous Maori Party.
And his goal explicitly, was to create that surplus.
He said it publicly. The goal was to build a big majority, 69 seats in a 122-seat parliament, so that no single one of his partners could hold him hostage. He institutionalized Clark's safety net.
But Key's government added a really crucial innovation that made the model even more stable.
He did. He understood that to keep these partners loyal, you had to give them more than just policy wins. You had to give them a real sense of inclusion.
So what did he do?
He still kept a single-party national cabinet, but he gave all his junior partners non-cabinet ministerial roles. But here's the game changer. He invited the leaders of all the support parties to attend all cabinet committee meetings.
So even though they couldn't vote in the full cabinet, they had a voice in shaping policy from the very beginning.
It gave them huge influence. It was the ultimate insider status without full responsibility. And he also formally relaxed the rules of ministerial responsibility, making it official that these non-cabinet ministers could vote against the government on issues outside their specific area.
So, for example, the minority party could support the government's budget, but then vote against a bill on, say, asset sales, if it conflicted with their principles.
And I did, frequently. Key understood that allowing for that dissent on specific issues was the price you had to pay for overall stability. This highly consultative, collegial approach worked.
It seems like it did.
It was hugely successful. It helped National win strong victories in 2011 and 2014, and he just kept using the same formula. It proved that this network model wasn't a temporary fix. It was the new, stable reality of governing New Zealand.
So when you look back at the whole journey, what's the big takeaway?
I think the New Zealand story shows us that a big institutional shock, like the shift to MMP, can be incredibly destabilizing at first. You had that chaotic period with failed coalitions, but it also forces politicians to be creative, to adapt. And they developed these flexible support contracts that ultimately proved to be more stable.
So the key was to move responsibility out of that narrow, all-or-nothing cabinet model.
And spread it across a broader, more flexible parliamentary coalition. It allowed governments to build majorities without demanding total loyalty from everyone on everything all the time.
So what does this incredible political journey in New Zealand mean for you, the listener, especially in a world where so many political systems are becoming more and more fragmented?
Well, I think the key lesson is that the stability of a government today depends less on having a rigid written coalition deal and far more on the political skill of the leader to negotiate a flexible, redundant network of support.
A network that can manage ideological differences instead of trying to crush them.
Exactly. And this political gray zone where support is conditional and transactional, it's becoming more and more common everywhere.
So the final thought we want to leave you with is this. Think about your own political system. How much of this kind of conditional support is happening behind the scenes, keeping the government of the day in power?
And perhaps more importantly, given the low accountability these junior partners often have, how much do you really know about the details of those deals? The policy trade-offs, the backroom agreements? New Zealand's stability was bought with flexibility, but that flexibility demands constant vigilance from the public.